Welcome to Turning Hard Times to Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor. I'm speaking to you from the borough of Queens, New York City. It is the 29th of November, 2022. And as always, I'd like to thank you for listening to this show and encourage you to send along whatever comments you have about it to questionsfortaylor@gmail.com. Questions, the number 4, taylor@gmail.com. And of course, we do want to thank our sponsors because they make this show possible. Irving Resources, Novo Resources, Gold Bull Resources, Eloro Resources, Reyna Gold Mining, Lion One Metals, and Timberline Resources are today's sponsors. I've titled today's show, "The U.S. Has Sold Out the American People." James Rickards and Dr. Quinton Hennigh return. James visits to talk about his latest book titled Sold Out. It focuses on broken global supply chains, surging inflation, and the fastest rise in interest rates in our history. Add to that a Western world that is on the verge of bankruptcy thanks to the overconsumption and undersavings that have taken place ever since 1971, and you have the potential for a global depression akin to, or God forbid, possibly worse than that of the 1930s. Even prior to COVID and the Ukrainian war, Rickards predicted that when this current bubble implodes, national central banks would themselves become bankrupt and thus give way to the IMF that would replace the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency with the SDR. It's a unit of currency that would include various currencies and gold. With central banks now losing control of inflation, forcing interest rates dramatically higher, Rickards' prediction that central banks are heading towards insolvency indeed seems to be coming true. Certainly, if you look at the balance sheets of various central banks, they are underwater because they loaded up on low-priced, low interest rate debt, and as the interest rates are rising, those assets are underwater. And so actually the net worth of various major central banks are now negative. COVID policies and the war in the Ukraine are no doubt accelerating the demise of the existing dollar-based fiat system. I'll try to get an answer from Jim Rickards as to where he sees this current mess playing out, how it's going to play out, and how you can best protect your financial well-being and safety in the turbulent times to come. We do have a very long show today, a lot to talk about, so I'm going to be very brief here and just say that we're going to go to break, but I'd suggest you not go very far away, especially if you're interested in silver, because Dr. Quinton Hennigh is going to be with me right after this break to talk about Eloro's Iska Isak world-class silver tin polymetallic deposit that really is starting to look like a world-class silver mine. It could be one of the largest silver mines in the world. Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm glad to tell you that Quinton Hennigh is back with me today, this time to give us an update on Eloro Resources. It's that company's silver tin-rich polymetallic deposit called the Iska Isak. It's in Bolivia, and it's a project that appears destined, it seems to me anyway, destined to become one of the largest silver mines in the world with considerable values of tin, lead, and zinc as well. Eloro trades in Canada under the symbol ELO. You can buy it down here in the States, ELRRF, 70 million shares thereabouts, $2.61 when I last checked earlier today, giving it a market cap of around $183 million. Thanks for joining me again, Quinton.
Always a pleasure, Jay.
Thank you. It's so good to have you again. And I do understand, with regard to Eloro, I understand that the company, they put out a press release this morning. It's my understanding that the definition drill program in the Santa Barbara target, that's the main target that they've been shooting at for the last couple of years, that the company is planning to provide a maiden resource in 2023. So I guess they've finished the drilling for that Santa Barbara to enable them now to provide a maiden resource?
Yes, that's exactly right. If you look at the history of drilling at Iska Isak, they started, I think, roughly September of 2020. So we're a little over 2 years into this project. They've completed, I believe, north of 80,000 meters as a news release, and I think they have a few, say 10, 15,000 meters left of drill holes in the lab. But you're right. They've done a very focused program to drill off an initial resource target area. around the Santa Barbara feeder, but also extensions to the northwest and to the southeast from that. So it's an absolutely enormous area. It's a system that has yet to be defined. Like the limits have yet to be defined. Mm-hmm. So this is really whatever they come out with an initial resource here is going to be a starting point. It's not going to be the total mineral system by any stretch. But they're going to come out with an enormous number.
Yeah. So, I'd like to, if you can give us a little more color on that. For example, can you talk about the Santa Barbara area that will probably be in the maiden resource? Can you give us some sense of the dimensions of that?
Yeah, certainly. Look, they're always good about putting maps on their website. At this point, I think the entire envelope of what they're targeting, which is usually shown, I think, in a red dashed line on their maps, is nearly 2 kilometers from northwest to southeast. So it's absolutely huge. It's about 1 kilometer wide, or up to 1 kilometer wide, I should say. And I think some of the deepest drill holes test as far as 800 meters vertically below surface. It is open at depth, but that gives you a sense of the scale. I mean, we're talking about, somewhere between 1.5 and 2 cubic kilometers of rock that have been tested, which is just mind-boggling. Now, it's not to say all of it is mineralized. Okay, a subset of that is mineralized. I would say within the let's kind of keep it real here. Let's talk about the Santa Barbara core area there, where they're seeing the high grade feeder and clearly an increased grade of silver, zinc, lead, and even tin in places. That I would expect to deliver a few 100 million tons. Exactly where they're going to maybe a 500 million tons. I don't know, but I think it's going to be a big initial number. I think it will grow from there. There's certainly, the geophysics has a huge expression, so there's certainly a lot more area to test. And they, of course, have that tin porphyry likely buried at depth on the south end of the whole system here. So, this is it's going to be an exciting story to watch it unfold. I think, most people don't understand the Bolivian systems because there's not a lot of these in the market. If you look at publicly traded companies, really, this is the first publicly traded company that has one of these for many, many years. Like Apex Silver, way back, and this is going back 15 or 20 years ago, had St. Cristobal mine. They developed that property, I think, starting in the mid to late 1990s, and they drilled it up and then took it into production around 2006 or 7, I believe it was. That is a very similar deposit. Just to give people a perspective, it's a large tonnage. It's like 300 million tons in that case, of about an ounce and a tenth of silver, something like a 35 gram silver, call it, and about 1.5 to 1.6 or 7% combined zinc lead. In the case of St. Cristobal, no tin. There is tin at Iska Isak, which is a big addition to value. The tin content, even though it's on the order of about 0.1, 0.2%, somewhere in that range. With tin prices where they're at, that is a significant value add.
Yeah, and do you suspect that? I mean, I know they're going to be doing a lot of infill drilling. I suppose continuing to do infill drilling as the project progresses. But do you think an ounce, 2 ounces, 2 ounces silver equivalent? Have you any sort of sense of what the average grades might be?
Yeah, I've been keeping track. The mineralized intervals are what I'm focused on. I'm not looking at the entire lengths of the drill holes by any stretch. I would say right now, roughly 30-40% of the volume of that initial target area that I mentioned, the 2 kilometers by 1 kilometer, 100 meters. I'd say 30% of that volume is looking like it. 30 to 40%, I should say, has mineralized intercepts. So that. If you put all those in the bag, kind of do a weighted average, I get somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 or 4 ounces silver equivalent.
Wow, and that's silver equivalent. And how much does tin factor into that?
Tin is a big contributor. In fact, in many places, the value of the tin exceeds the silver. So I would say it's at least as important as the silver, if not a bit more.
Wow. And I think you just alluded to the fact that it looks like there might be a richer tin resource to the south. And recently, I believe the company expanded its holdings there in the direction of that southwestern portion of this big caldera, right?
That is correct. Yeah, apparently they've been working on that land acquisition, for quite some time. I think part of the reason they haven't pursued it as aggressively as they might have initially planned is because they were trying to get that deal done and recorded with the government.
Uh-huh.
Now it is able to test it a little more aggressively. It does give them access to the lower topography in that area, so it should be easier to drill that deep target from lower elevations than it would from, say, the top of the mountain.
Mm-hmm. Well, this certainly does seem to be a world-class deposit, and clearly a lot more work to do. But it seems to me the market's going to want to see this maiden resource. I mean, I'm really anxious to see what it's going to look like, and then there'll be probably more infill drilling that could maybe make it better, even possibly. I don't know. Or worse.
The infill drilling is going to help. It always does. I think it's going to give better definition. Usually in a case like this, infill drilling has very little impact on the overall tons, but what it typically does, at least in my experience, is it usually enhances the grade, because as you do more infill drilling, you start to get better definition on the what would be smaller, volumetrically smaller but higher grade parts of the system. And those are what can add a lot of ultimate grade to your overall resource. So I think this initial resource will probably be heavily inferred and maybe some indicated. There's certainly enough drilling in the core area around Santa Barbara to have some indicated. But I think going forward, you'll see continued improvement as the infill drill. You'll see a continued improvement in the overall grade.
Mm-hmm. I noticed in today's news release there was some reference to, I think one of the drill holes was a metallurgical hole drilled for metallurgical studies. Has the company, I think they did some work before on metallurgy, did they not?
They did. They put some initial metallurgical results out. I believe it was within the past half year, maybe in June sometime. That's my guess. And the results were very strong. So, let's kind of step back and look at this thing. Like I said, it's a big low-grade system, so you should think of this more like a porphyry type system or something, at least in terms of its grade and so forth. Okay, so we're looking at basically a suite of metals, including silver, lead, zinc, and tin in this. And you're going to have to produce several concentrates. Okay, the likely outcome is going to be producing a zinc concentrate. That would be number one. The second concentrate would be a lead concentrate, which would capture a lot of the silver, and then a separate tin concentrate. Okay, so you have three different concentrates. The lead and the zinc were float tested earlier this year, and the results were fantastic. The recoveries, my recollection is the recoveries were in the 80%, and that's very typical for a system like this. So I think the recoveries are well. They're telling us that this is well within the range of what should be expected for this type of system. They're low in deleterious elements, so there's not a lot of nasty elements that smelters don't like in there. They're very clean concentrates, and they have a very high silver component. Even the zinc captured some of the silver. So that should mean that these concentrates are widely sought after in the smelting space around the world. Okay, there's a lot of demand for zinc and lead concentrates. And then as far as the tin goes, the work that they were doing on the tin, I think they did some gravimetric work or gravity recovery, and they were shifting more towards a flotation recovery for the tin, which occurs as a mineral called cassiterite. And the reason for that is because I think it was fairly fine grain. They were finding out the tin mineral, this cassiterite, is fairly fine grain, and it's likely going to be that flotation is the better means of recovery. They haven't published any further information about recovery of tin yet, but my hunch is, looking at other Bolivian systems in the area, which there are several state-owned Bolivian mines of this type, I would say they should see pretty decent tin recoveries. I don't think there's going to be any nasty surprises there.
Right. There could be some variation, though, as I understand it. The percentage of different metals changes in different parts of this of this deposit. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. So it is a zone deposit. Up high, you typically get the zinc and lead and silver. So, if you look at these drill holes, even the ones that came in today, for example, fairly shallow levels, you're seeing high grades of lead, zinc, usually 1.5% or 2% or so combined, and then silver's usually in the tens of grams. And then as you look at some of the numbers that are coming from depth, you start to see that tin pickup. So tin usually occurs a little bit deeper, at least in higher concentrations. And that's as you get closer to the source, the magmatic source for the fluids that generated the mineral deposit itself.
Right. Quinton, let me just a couple of minutes here left to go. This is going to be a big deposit. This is a big deposit, obviously, as you just outlined. It's going to require an awful lot of capital. Are there big mining companies that might be interested in something like this? Because it's not something that I don't think Eloro is going to try to tackle.
Absolutely. Look, there's a lot of companies right now looking for new zinc deposits to develop. Zinc is one of these metals that we often forget to look for as exploration geologists and mining companies. And right now there is a shortage of new zinc mines. Okay, so there's a demand for these things, and I think you're starting to see a lot of companies, the more typical companies like Teck and Glencore and even some of the Aussies like BHP and stuff start to expand in, and Rio expand into these types of deposits. These are world-class deposits. They do require a fair bit of capital. My bet is this will probably be developed at a rate of maybe 50 to 100,000 tons of ore per day. A mine like that might take $1.5 billion to develop or something. So It's not for the faint of heart. It's probably not going to be developed by Eloro, but it will likely be targeted and bought by one of these major mining companies.
Right. Well, I guess just one final question then before we let you go, Quinton. Is the company well funded? And what are they planning to do after they come out with this resource? Do you have an idea about that?
Yeah, look, they're doing a PEA alongside this resource. The goal here is to deliver not only a resource, but also a PEA, either concurrently or shortly thereafter. I think they're going to continue drilling, at least on a limited basis, to test some of these extensions, to infill and test this porphyry at depth. But I don't know exactly how much cash they have in the bank, but I understand they've got plenty of cash to make it through this MRE. So I think until that time, I don't see any need for capital raise that I know of, at least.
All right, very good. Well, thank you so much, Quinton, for updating us on this very exciting story. I think if people are looking for a silver play, this is one they might want to take a look at.